Perfect. Welcome, everyone. This is the third session of our Fall 2021 Mentorship Program. Today's topic is going to be interviewing and resume writing. So the panelists for today are myself, Brian. We have Angie Hardy, and then we have Laura Ackenboy. So we're going to be talking about, interview skills, do's, do nots, resume, what should you have, what shouldn't you have, how to handle some of those tougher questions. So again, we have it set up as a panel, but really do want this to be a conversation. So feel free, raise your hand, speak up, and if you need clarification, if you have a very specific question, a very broad question, this is kind of here to benefit everyone and kind of help spread the knowledge. So with that, we do have some starter questions to kind of get the ball rolling. So I'll lead in with one of those, but feel free to jump in at any time. You can come off mute, or if it's easier, just come through the chat and ask whatever, any questions or anything that come to mind. So Angie, we'll go ahead and we'll start with you. Thinking about with resume specifically, for someone who, let's say you have a lot of experience or an extensive job history, but not necessarily accounting. So like in my own background, when I was starting to apply for internships, I had 7 years of work experience working in a grocery store, but obviously there's nothing to do with accounting at first glance. So Angie, how do you think our folks should kind of approach that kind of question?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think if you ask 7 different people, you might get 7 different answers. But my opinion is, well, let me start by saying I think that each resume should be kind of crafted or customized specifically for each job that you apply for. I think that can go a long way to just tailor what they're looking for and putting certain things, front and center. I would probably put just a single line item summarizing it, like I worked at a grocery store, I worked wherever, and maybe highlight what might be relevant to what the job you're applying for. I think some employers do look for gaps, and so that can be important in that sense. But you don't need to go into a lot of detail, and that's my opinion. Is I don't like to see excruciating detail on resumes. I shouldn't read like a desk procedure. So just a quick blurb. That's my opinion.
Laura, how about you?
I mean, I agree with Angie as far as relevance. Just because you have like 10 years of experience in something, if it's not relevant to your current role, you have to be very cautious about what you list on there. But I feel like there's also ways you can describe what you did that would actually apply to your current role. Like if you worked as a cashier in a grocery store, for instance, that's not necessarily accounting, but the way you word it on your resume, dealing with customers, like customer service, actually still applies to accounting, because technically clients are customers, right? Like it's still the same types of interaction, just in accounting, a bit more level, like detail required. So I would say it just depends on how you like describe the experience, but I'm sure you can find something in that you can pull out as a strength, like what you achieved, from that experience. If it's made you a better person working in a team, or like soft skills type thing, that would definitely go a long way. It doesn't have to be like debits and credits, but it can just be how well you function within like an organization. So it's not all like a waste, basically. Yeah.
I love that line, Laura. How well you function in an organization. Like that to me sums it up perfectly. People refer to them a lot as soft skills, but really like those quote unquote soft skills, they can fit into anything. I mean, regardless of whether you're doing accounting, working at a grocery store, part of a sports team, helping out, doing volunteer work, anything at all, those skills like communication, time management, leadership, all of that stuff is applicable anywhere you go. So that was the stuff I would say, if you don't have anything that's directly relevant to accounting, but maybe you do have extensive experience in something, it's unrelated, but as part of that experience, you maybe moved up in that role and you were like, like a supervisor or manager of some type, and you were managing other people. Even though the work is different, just the act of like managing other people and resources and things, that's still highly, highly applicable to what you would be doing in accounting. So don't, obviously relevant experience is best, of course, but, don't think that just because it doesn't seem relevant at first glance, doesn't mean you can't apply it to a role in accounting. So let me stop there. Does anyone else have any questions? Again, we have some set up, but really want to hear from the mentees or even the mentors. If there's something, maybe, a question that you think, maybe in the interview perspective that you might ask people that would be good for the mentees to hear. Anyone at all, feel free to chime in. If not, we can move on to the next question. Feel free to do, type it in the chat if you're too nervous to kind of come off mute. Okay, all right, we'll jump to the next one. Laura, we'll start with you. So thinking about interviewing, I think this is the question I get so often about interviews. Every interview feels like it starts with, so tell me about yourself. And Angie, I think you hit the nail on the head. You ask, 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers. But based on your, your own experience, or maybe, talking with others, and Laura, we'll start with you on this. How do you answer that question? I think that, there's different ways you can frame it, but I feel like there's a good way and a bad way to respond to that. I know I've done both in the past. So how would you answer that question, Laura?
So for me, I feel like it's all about a balance between personal and professional. A lot of times the same person applying for that role has the same education. They have a bachelor's in accounting or whatever. They probably have like 2 years of experience, which may be slightly different from yours. But the reason why I say balance between personal and professional is that you want to be personal, but not too personal. Because your resume is already giving them the professional idea of who you are. But that brings back that conversation about non-technical skills, like the soft skills, right? Like when you describe yourself, you have to basically put in there something that says who you are as a person. Like, for instance, you're diligent or whatever, or some people start by whatever phase they're in. Like if you're like a CPA candidate and you're taking the exam, that could totally walk into that intro of tell me about yourself, how you came to that step of like, I'm going to take the CPA exam, something like that. But usually when I approach that question, I start by saying, where I'm from or where I went to college. And sometimes it could be like where you went to college is what will click with the person, like, oh, my cousin is from that school, or something random that's going to set you apart from the next person with like an accounting degree, same as you. So usually I try to work something memorable into that question when I answer it. Like, for instance, for my job, I can say, I moved here from Tennessee. Obviously, this is not a Tennessee accent. I'm originally from Nigeria, and they crack a joke, like they smile, like, ah, funny, like, or from my name, you can already tell that I'm not from Memphis, like, so something like that, and how basically I have been adaptable to different situations so far in my career, and now for this role, being adaptable is not always just professional. It can be things you do in your personal life, how you basically roll with the punches, little things like that, bits and pieces into that intro. It doesn't have to be like a well-crafted intro, but you basically are telling them like a snapshot of how I got to this decision to apply for this role, something like that. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I'll say two things. One, it might feel awkward maybe repeating some of the things that are on your resume, but that's okay. Like, don't always assume that whoever you're interviewing with has read your resume or even read it in detail. It could be the case that they're the ones doing interviews that day and they're interviewing, 10 other people, and they might have taken a quick 30-second glance at your resume, but without being able to, okay, let me take 2 or 3 minutes and actually really get down to the details. So don't be afraid to repeat things that are on your resume. Also, there's a percentage that I've heard thrown out, 70-30. 70% of how you answer that question should be things that come from your resume. So like work experience, school, volunteer work, things like that. 30% should be stuff that's not on the resume, and then you do the personal stuff. That's where you say, oh, you know, I like to go hiking, I just got a new puppy, things like that. I know I made the mistake when I was in school. Like one of my first corporate interviews was actually at Valero down in San Antonio, and I did 100% professional stuff that was just on the resume, and got feedback later. It's like, you told me all about you as a student, as a potential employee, but I didn't learn anything about you personally. Like you only told me things that were on your resume, which, so you didn't give me any new information that I could learn about you. So you know, try to remember that 70-30 rule. 30% is whatever it is, little personal tidbits here and there. Like Laura, I think you said it perfectly. You don't want to get too personal. But again, if you have hobbies, interests, things outside of work, that other person very likely might have similar hobbies. Angie, how about yourself? How would you answer this?
No, I echo everything you guys said. It was great. And just add one thing that I like to know is kind of collaboration style, working style. So things like, you know, I work really well independently, but I also can work in a team. If it's a leadership role you're interviewing for, talk about your leadership style. Something that's humanizing, but again, without being too personal. That's a fine line sometimes. But yeah, no, I think you guys nailed it. Thanks.
I'm just gonna add, you know, to what Angie said, that if you're a student, I feel like you should take those personal assessment tests just to know yourself better. Like there's a lot of free ones out there. The Strengths Finder. In my college, they made us take it freshman year, and then you take it again like senior year to see how it's changed. And then funny enough, my first job in Austin, like when I moved to Texas, they had us take that exact same test. It's going to change every time because you're supposed to grow. I mean, there's some three of the 5 top strengths will probably be constant, but it will change. And that will help you a lot when you go into like interviews about you as a person. You can say, you know, communication is one of your top strengths, or your there's one strength that's like harmony or something like that, meaning like you're the one person that brings the team together, like cohesiveness. So things like that go a long way. It just shows that you actually know yourself as an individual and also as a professional. So I will stop now.
Perfect. And again, feel free to, you know, throw out a question either in chat or, you know, come off mute at any time. Here's a good one. How common is behavioral interviewing questions? You know, questions start that tell me about a time when. I would say those are very common. Because I mean, it's a good way, again, because the whole point of what the interviewer, hiring manager is trying to do is they're trying to get a good sense of who you are, not, you know, yes, no, you know, do you know this particular section of the tax code? And yes, it's really trying to get more of an in-depth, broad overview of you, and those kind of questions really open it up when, you know, they're trying to set it up so you tell them some kind of story, basically. And that's always also how you should also answer those questions. You never want to be you don't want to be too specific with it. So don't say, oh yeah, you know, this time, you know, I worked with Ted and for a tax return for this particular client. And no, you want to keep really, really broad. Like, you know, oh, last busy season, we were working on a number of returns, and you keep it broad. So that way you kind of show that well-roundedness. Angie, how would you answer this?
Yeah, that's definitely very common. And one of the things that I've learned as a manager is that when somebody tells you a story, you can listen, you can hear other things in that story besides the actual facts of the story. You can read into somebody's maybe emotional temperament or their values. And I think you should keep it broad, but like it should be specific enough to show like, well, here was the problem and here's the obstacles that I overcame to resolve it. And then, you know, this is the resolution. I think you should have a few of those stories kind of in your back pocket going into an interview, because those are very, very common for interviewers to ask.
Laura?
Yeah, I definitely agree with it being broad, because especially in public accounting, depending on like which area you're in, there's some level of confidentiality that you can, I mean, there's best practices for the industry, but then there's still firm specific information that you don't want to give too much away, but technical enough that you can show that this was how you approached the problem and this was how you solved it. You don't have to like name names. You can just be like, you know, a big client, a senior associate, something along those lines, but you don't necessarily have to be like this one guy that I worked with. Like you don't have to be that specific. You can just saying a teammate is fine and all of that. You don't want to be too specific, because that also shows how you work as a professional. If you're going to be someone that shares client information that's not, you know, meant to go outside, because technically during the interview you're still working for that firm a lot of the time. Like you're still at that company, and so you want to make sure you don't cross those boundaries that could actually hurt you, or you don't know if one of the person interviewing with you is like close with one of the partners or something at your firm, and it gets back. So be careful.
Definitely. And I would say going into the interview, like try to have 2 to 4 like situations already in your mind that you could speak to that cover multiple areas. So maybe you were, you know, working busy season last week and something happened to someone, and so you kind of had to step up and move into a new role, you know, temporarily. As part of that new role, you had to learn like additional like technical skills or tax rules that you hadn't been exposed to before. You could show a lot of different things there, like, oh, you know, leadership skills, being a team player, you know, good tax research skills. That's a little more specific. But that one story can apply to multiple different questions or types of questions. So try to have, you know, 2 or 3 different stories you could tell that apply to different things. So that way, regardless of what kind of questions get thrown out at you, you're like, oh, okay, story number 2 kind of fits the bill, and you share that story. And then ask different questions. Story number 1 can fit that bill. So that way you're not left, you don't find yourself being like, well, let me think. You know, in an interview, I mean, a short pause is not a bad thing. In fact, it can actually help you sometimes. Say, you know, pro tip, always have a bottle of water in the interview. If they offer, even if you're not thirsty, always have the bottle of water. So when they ask you a question that's like a little different question, like, that's a good question. And you give yourself just that few seconds. Okay, let me think of which of my 3 stories is going to fit into this, and then you go. Especially because and this kind of leads right into our next question, when they ask you like an unexpected question. So for example, let's say you're applying for an audit internship, and the question they come out at you is, tell me about your experience working on corporate tax returns. And so you're kind of floored. You're like, okay, this is an audit internship. I didn't mention this anywhere on my resume that I, worked in corporate tax. So Laura, we'll start with you. One of these curveball kind of questions, how would you approach it?
So I think this is where that strengths finder test or whatever comes in. Because for me, how I approached questions like this was that whenever I took that assessment, learner was one of my top 5 strengths. And so whenever I get a question like this, that's usually how I start, by saying, one of my top 5 strengths is learner. And this has actually been very, evident in my previous experience. I've been able to pick something up and learn it really quickly. So even though I don't have corporate tax experience, I'm sure there's going to be a learning curve in the beginning, but I'm sure it's something I can quickly get my head around. Something like that you don't know.
Great answer.
You don't know this now, but you can learn it. For instance, when I was switching to BKD from my previous firm, I didn't use the same software. I didn't use Go Systems. I'd never used Go Systems. And that was part of the, question was like, okay, have you used Go Systems before? I was like, no, I've only used Pro Systems with CCH. I haven't used the Thomson Reuters version. And I was like, but I can learn it really quickly, just like I learned all the other software quickly. And sure enough, first week of work was basically me doing things that would allow me, like working on little projects that would allow me learn that software really quickly. And now I get to train other people to use it, right? So I think you can just show that you're teachable and you're willing to learn, regardless of like the role. Like even if you're coming in as a manager, you won't, just know that you won't have all the skills required, especially with software. It's always different from, even with Excel, the level of difficulty gets, it's like the level of usage varies from company to company. So you don't have to be an expert. You just have to have that willingness to learn attitude, right? And once you put that out there, that I don't know this, but I'm willing to learn, the company will actually put in the time to train you in the beginning, and since they already prefaced, it's better than saying, oh, well, I know a little bit of corporate tax when you don't, and you get to return your first week, and now you have to bother everybody on the team to help you. So I think it's just, I would rather say I don't know it, but I can learn it really fast, because you're not going to be a generalist and even within tax. I don't do sales and use tax. Like that's salt, that's its own. But just because I'm a tax person, doesn't mean that, yeah, I can also do that. So you have to be very clear so that you're not drowning like your first week. So, yeah.
Angie, anything to add on that?
Not really, although I was kind of laughing. One question I always ask everyone I interview is, what's your favorite Excel function? Just because it gives me a little insight into their brain and their Excel experience.
Yeah, I've said this before, like good Excel skills are highly, 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 highly coveted. Especially if you're at the point where you VBA and you can do macros. Like people worship the ground you walk on. Like even I'm obviously at like one of the big four firms, and like I'm in a technology group, and there's I think about 200 or so of us like in this group, and like then that immediate team of mine, there's maybe 5 or 6 people who like actually know VBA well enough to actually put it to use. So like really good Excel skills anywhere you go are going to be highly, highly valued. Okay. Before we go to the next question, does anyone else have any questions they want to drop in the chat? Go ahead, Mary. If you want, if it's easier, you can just come off mute. Ooh, I like that. Go ahead, Angie.
It's funny, there's no wrong answer, but like I love it when somebody comes out with, oh, I love index match, or, I want to do a pivot table and then VLOOKUP off it, something that is, it doesn't have to be super, well, index match is pretty advanced. And then I'm like, oh, I can learn from you. But what I'm looking for is like not a deer in the headlights look, for one thing. And then also just some level of, proficiency. And it could be a sum if, it could be even just, average or something, as long as they have a reason, thought process behind why they like it.
Yeah, I would just add, if you can do nested formulas, which is basically like using a formula inside, like, you have a sum if, and inside that is like an average or something. If you can do nested formulas, like you're going to be well ahead of the curve. Like a lot of people I work with my old tax group, like, could do some of the more, like what would be considered more advanced things like VLOOKUP, pivot table, even index match. But a lot of people, like when you think like if formulas and like nesting things within the if logic, that's really starting to get to a higher order of Excel skill. And if you can start, then just at practice home, just practice, making formulas and then tweaking little parts of it here and there. It's a skill that will take you a very, very long way as you kind of move through your career. Oh, Macy's saying, okay, you're really way out there with Power BI, Power Query, Power Pivot. So those are very, I wouldn't say they're very advanced Excel skills. They're just kind of tool sets within Excel that I would say few people have had the exposure to be able to really like use in practice. But yeah, any practice, like even at like my firm, like we're just starting to get introduced to that for a lot of folks on all of those, like what they call the Microsoft Power Platform. So if you can really start to learn even the tiniest bit about those, that's going to basically future-proof yourself, so to speak. Those are going to be skills that are going to become very, very, very highly coveted as time goes on. Just because, again, most people just haven't even had the exposure to begin to learn them. So, just, whenever you have a chance, on the side, okay, let me take 20 minutes, and this is how I would normally do it. Let me try to, within Excel, open up Power Query and try to do certain things in there. But they have, if you go to Microsoft or even like, YouTube, there's all kinds of video tutorials and things that you can look into to kind of get yourself started. But yes, those are going to be very valuable skills in the future. There was one more thing I wanted to say that Angie had mentioned. I can't remember it, so we'll come back to it. Any other questions? So that 5-part course, do you have a link you could maybe share with the group, Macy? I'm not 100% sure which course you're talking about. Was that the CPA?
I'll try and find it again. It was like 3 years ago, but I'll try and find it and drop a link. Okay,
perfect. So that might just be one of the CPE classes that was offered, it sounds like. So yeah, I would definitely take advantage of, even as a student member, like you get, either it'll be discounted, or I know there's some cases where some of the CPE is free. That applies to you as a student member. So if there's a topic that sounds really interesting, feel free to sign up for it. I mean, obviously the CPE credit won't be necessarily useful to you right away, but the technical skills you'll learn during that CPE obviously will make a difference. Okay, let's go to the next one. So think about interviewing, and Laura, we'll start with you. What is the #1 mistake you've seen or heard people make in an interview?
For me, I think it's not knowing enough about the company or the role that you're applying to. I feel like if you're applying to a role, if the job description is detailed enough, you should be able to anticipate what the role looks like. The interview is basically for you to ask them questions about things that were not clear on that job description, like referencing that. So if it's a situation where they're talking about the role in the interview and you just have a dazed look like, what are you talking about? Like, what have I gotten myself into? That's usually a bad sign to the person. For me, a lot of times, if there's something that's unclear, like me as the applicant, if there's something that's unclear about that role, I usually throw it back to the person interviewing. If you say this person will, work on special projects, can you give me an example of one of those special projects? Like, what should I expect? And are those seasonal or something like that? So it actually shows that you didn't just passively apply to the role, or even to the company in general. If you don't even know that company's customers, right? You don't know exactly what they do. That's usually a red flag that maybe you shouldn't be in that interview in the first place. And they can tell if you haven't done your research, which I feel like that's a stupid thing to do now, where there's Glassdoor, there's Wikipedia, there's Google. You can literally get a very, very short summary cheat sheet of what that company is about, their vendors, their if it's a subsidiary of another company, things a lot of times they will end up referencing the parent company or something if you're in industry. So things like that, if they're saying something and you just look confused, or you're a tax person and they're saying something like, oh, the new tax bill or something, and you're just that's not a good sign. So I feel like that's a mistake that people make when interviewing. Know enough about what you're getting into. And if you don't, that's that opportunity at the end when they say, do you have a question? That's where you chime in. It actually shows that you're interested it shows your interest in that company or in the role. So also don't leave an interview without asking a question. Even if it's just something as general as, oh, can you tell me about your day-to-day or what my day-to-day will look like? If it's somebody that's the person interviewing you is somebody that you're going to be reporting to, or if it's a group-based interview where it's like there's 3 people interviewing you, and sometimes they're like on different levels, like somebody on your level, somebody higher, you can just, toss the question back to them and say, as an associate or whatever, what's my day-to-day going to look like? And you as a manager, what does your day-to-day look like? Like, what can I expect? That means you're already thinking long-term, like with that company, like if I get to that level, what can I expect? So ask questions when you don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on that. Like, ask questions. Always ask questions, especially, like any good interviewer should always, at the end, conclude the interview with, okay, do you have any questions for me? And you always, always, always have questions. That was a mistake I made. My first corporate interview ever, I had just been at UTSA for like 3 months or something, interviewing with the tax director at Valero at the time. And prior to this interview, I had talked with several people at recruiting events. There was actually someone, part of the professional organization I was part of on campus, that had interned with them the previous year, and I had grilled him with every question I could think of. So in my mind, I was like, I legitimately don't have any questions, because I thought I was doing my due diligence. I took the time to learn all the questions that, learn and ask all the questions I needed to answer, which is great. That is fine. The problem was the interviewer does not know that. You could have spent 2 whole days researching the company top to bottom. You might have had lunch with the CFO the day before. The person on the other side of the interviewing table is not going to know that. So that's why you need to ask questions, whatever it is, so you can show that, hey, yes, there is an interest. And Laura, I really like what you said there about asking the manager about their day-to-day. People know, asking those people above the role that you're applying for, because again, just like Laura said, they can already see that not only do you want to work here, you're actually thinking about your future at that company by asking, hey, 3 years from now, if I get promoted, what would I be doing? So ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Angie, anything to add?
I've made that same mistake before too, but where I'm working, and I work in industry, but the software company I'm working for now, I actually read their 10K before I went in for the interview. And so I was able to ask some very detailed questions. And one of the managers or directors that was interviewing me was like, how do you know that? Like, he was so taken aback. And I said, oh, from the 10K. And then that was a point in my favor, and part of probably why I got the job. Yeah, definitely ask questions. I've made that mistake before, not asking questions. It can be something like, what's the culture like? It can be very broad. The only other thing I would add on to that is, it's a big turn off to me when an applicant starts bashing their current company. And that kind of almost goes without saying, but I'm just going to say it anyway, because I've had it happen this year where somebody was interviewing and was like, oh, let me tell you about my old boss. He's such a jerk, and it's a big red flag for an interviewer.
Well, 100%. Always keep it positive. Laura, I think you were saying a little bit like that too. You might still be at that company. Maybe you've already left. Always keep it positive, because in their mind, if you're bad, maybe you were at your previous employer for a number of years, and if you're bad mouthing them in an interview, what are they going to think? Okay, if you're here for a few years and you go somewhere else, are you going to bad mouth me also?
Right.
So, and especially like knowing how small the accounting world is, it will get back to someone. So
don't burn any bridges.
Yeah, always keep
Never.
it positive. It's okay to be very generous. Oh yeah, we had a rough, busy season. It was lots of extra hours and whatnot. It's okay to describe the situation, but never specifically call out bad management or this one manager. Yeah, always try to keep it positive. Okay, that's a good question, Mary. What questions are good to ask to learn about the culture? For me, I would say, like in terms of culture questions, I would ask, what are some of the team building activities you do, or does the team ever do anything outside of work, like maybe happy hours, or I know when I was working at Petco, like something we would do as a team, which was a small team. I think there was only like 6 of us, but every time someone on the team had a birthday as a team, we would all go out to eat together. So that's how I would say, like ask about, and maybe it's something maybe your interviewer can answer it. Maybe it's asking some of the other folks if they do like very often, I think some employers either before or after the interview, they'll kind of have you walk the office and meet some of the folks. Ask them, say, hey, what's the last, team event y'all did? Or you could think like, when was the last time that, let me rephrase that. Maybe you could speak to your own experience you've done. Say, oh yeah, at my old firm, we used to have this March Madness food tournament. Do y'all do anything like that here? And kind of set that question up for them to say, hey, here's what I'm used to. Do you have anything similar like that? Angie, how about you? Do you have another way to answer that?
Yeah, I think well, and again, I work in industry, but every company has its own kind of norms and culture around, like, do you communicate mostly over email or Slack? Or when you do have meetings, is there an agenda circulated in advance? Because some companies are very formal like that, and others are extremely casual and just, kind of throw a Zoom together with only 5 minutes notice. So getting a feel for that, it's not, you can say what you're used to and ask if it's similar. And that may not be that you have any problem with it. You just want to understand.
Laura?
For me, I mean, it can be things like casual Friday. Like, do you guys dress, casually at any point? Like, what's the dress code like? You can just ask about the dress code, things like that. I mean, in public accounting, they usually just say dress for your day. Like, you're gonna see a client today, then don't wear like shorts or something. Are you gonna be if you're gonna do that, take the back door. I know, like, when I worked downtown, we had like the main door that leads to the conference room where the client sits, and we had casual Fridays. But if there's a client coming in, casual Friday doesn't get canceled unless you're in that client meeting. So like, if you're not in that meeting, you can still wear your jeans or whatever. But if you're gonna use the restroom during that period, take the back door. So little things like that tells a lot about the culture, like how casual it is. Again, like Brian said, with the team events, like, do you guys celebrate like post 415? Like, if it's a tax role you're applying for, like, what did you guys do last year for, busy season deadline, something like that. And a lot of times they already, like, if it's a public accounting firm, part of your interview, it's usually like almost like a half a day thing where it gets into lunch, where you go out to lunch with, like, I mean, this is pre-COVID, so probably doesn't apply, but you go out to lunch with people that you're going to be working with on your level, like people that you're not reporting to. Like, if you're applying like as an associate, they will have like 2 associates take you to lunch so that it's more casual, and they talk about, like, not necessarily like the job, but like how it's been for them, like their experience. That's usually the goal of that lunch, is anything you couldn't ask in the interview. Trust me, that's the way you can bring it up. Like, please say as flexible as they said it will be, or whatever. Like, do you do flex Fridays, like during non-busy season? All of that is like culture related. It just tells you how flexible or not flexible it's going to be. So you just have to, those are questions that you don't necessarily have to come up with before the interview. It can literally be from something somebody said on the call or something that you saw when you walked in. So yeah, feel free to like freestyle that.
Yeah, I'll add real quick. Stalk their LinkedIn page. Like, go to that company's LinkedIn page, whether it's public accounting industry. Usually, if it's a smaller firm, this is usually a little bit more fruitful. If it's a very, very big firm, you may not necessarily see something because it'd be more based on the team. But if it's a smaller, like maybe a single office firm, go to their LinkedIn, like scroll through like a couple of months worth of their posts to see, are they sharing like those happy hours and post busy season things, or maybe they had like Halloween just ended, maybe they had a little in-office costume contest or something. So it's kind of leverage those tools available to look more into what the firm kind of has to offer and what they're doing today. Next question. So we're going to pivot over to resumes for a bit. And Laura, we'll start with you on this one. What is your number one resume tip for students / recent grads?
So a lot of times, like, students don't have like a lot of experience, especially if you're full-time, you were not like if you're the traditional student that's actually full-time in school, you may not have like all the experience, but I would say just take advantage of like your volunteer experience in college. Like if you were in like a club on campus or something like that, those showcase like your leadership skills, your team skills, things like that. If I put that on my resume, I'll put it in a way that would be advantageous in like a professional setting, right? Like the things you did in that club, like, oh, I know like in my college, an opportunity to get experience was we did volunteer tax return preparation. Like all the juniors and seniors did that every week, Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. So it's like, you also get extra credit for doing it, right? So it's like, you're getting experience, you're getting extra credit, and that goes on your resume. But the way that that's worded on your resume, it's more like a real life tax preparation experience, because you're actually preparing tax returns of people you don't know, like, actual clients, except they're not paying, but it's still the same approach. So something like that, that experience actually got me my first job in industry in tax, because I had basically interacted with people. I had seen what a tax return looked like, even though it wasn't like a job. So I would say take advantage of your volunteer opportunities and list those on there, even if you feel like you don't have enough experience, because again, those skills definitely help you. And if you're someone that's making a career change, that's not a traditional student, I would say your experience in a professional setting, like communicating with people, definitely helps. I know like especially in public accounting, we have so many people transition, like, somebody I currently work with, she was a teacher for like 15 years or something. And now she's starting over like as a tax associate, right? But she has an edge over the actual like entry level associate, because a lot of those things they have to train the associate on, like, oh, if your manager sends you an email, acknowledge it and just respond that you're working on it. She does all those things without being told, because she's been in a professional setting before, even though it's not accounting related. So I'll just say, it goes both ways. Your real life experience and your volunteer experience goes a long way. If you're a student on campus, I would say definitely know your professors. Like, don't just be a bench warmer in the class, but like actually know your professors, because they will be your first references. If you don't have a full-time job, it's hard for you to get references that are actually professional. So the people you interact with daily, which school is technically your professional life at that point, your professors that are going to go a long way in, like, if you needed a reference, for instance, for your job application or something. So I would say definitely take advantage of those benefits. And a lot of times they know about opportunities. They're like the first contact, especially for public accounting firms. They're the first contact from those firms. They're like, we're looking for interns this year. They reach out to them first. If you're in like a professor's class and they don't even know you exist in that class, your name is never going to come up in that conversation. Again, that goes back to how I got my first job out of college. The professor found out about the opportunity first and, gave them a bunch of names, and, that's how I ended up there. Obviously, the interview is still, up to you and your resume that you turned in for that interview, but you're already like step one. Somebody knows you exist and you're skilled to qualify for that role. So I'll stop rambling now.
Angie, how about you? Best resume tip?
I don't really have anything to add. I think Laura really nailed it. I think one thing that I made the mistake early on was I was leading with, so I have a bachelor's degree in linguistics, and I was leading with my education because it was the template that I had seen. But if I'm applying for an accounting job, that's not my strength at that point. So, I mean, just you can rearrange the resume in whatever order it needs to be so that you could lead with your strength.
Perfect. So I'm going to share a link. Hopefully this this works, but a resource I always point people to is the resume templates provided by the Macomb School of Business at UT Austin. That to me is kind of like the gold standard as far as, and if hopefully I'll take you to a Google search result. The first one is the actual resume template. The first hit, the second hit is like an overview, like resume writing and like what words to do and things like that. These are the two things I always point people to because it's not necessarily specific to accounting, but it is focused on business. And these are things that are definitely going to help your resume. My tip for you is, and hopefully I can convey this without having to share my screen since we're able to do that, but to make your resume really stand out, what I found super helpful is prepare it in a Word document and create tables for your different sections of your resume. Create a table so that way you can have things perfectly aligned throughout your resume. And then at the end, when you're done, turn all the borders to be white. So that way they basically disappear. That'll give you a perfect, like crisp looking resume with all the bullet points, the dates, everything lined up just the way you need, with no one being none the wiser the fact that you had it in a bunch of tables versus just like a typical text document. So that's my fun tip to you. It takes a little bit of playing with it to figure out the spacing and all that, but once you do have it, because that is one of the things I do see quite frequently, is typically most people with standard resume, they have their bullets on one side and on the other side is the dates, and the dates are almost always shifted a little bit. Most people have to, they have to do the space bar to get it spaced over just to the very end before it drops down to the next line. If you have a 2-column table with a very wide column for like the bullets and all the detail and a little tiny narrow column on the side for just the date section, it'll help you to keep everything perfectly aligned. Cool. All right, on to our next question. So I think Angie, you touched on this one a little bit, but I do want to kind of revisit it because I think it's a good question to branch out on. What order should the sections of my resume be in? Does it matter how I group things, such as quote unquote normal work experience versus volunteer experience? If I have those as separate sections in the same section. So as far as the structure of the resume, how much does that matter? Now we'll start with you, Angie.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I said. I don't think, there's a lot of templates out there you can copy or mimic, I guess I should say, that, some lead with education, some lead with experience. I think I've seen it both ways. I've seen volunteer and actual paid employment separate. I've also seen it together. I guess I probably have a slight preference for it all just being in chronological order. So it's easy to kind of follow the, okay, from 2010 to 2015, this, and then, so and so on. But I don't think that really matters so much. It's more personal preference. I will say another piece of advice is have somebody proofread it, just because it's impossible to catch everything yourself. And somebody's going to see something and say, well, that's just a little awkwardly worded or something. And like I said before, lead with your strength. Yeah, I don't really have anything else besides that.
I'll say to Angie's point, the order isn't as important as making sure it's relevant. And however you decide to group things, make sure that grouping is relevant. So for example,
and consistent.
Yes, consistency and relevance. So you can group work experience and volunteer experience. You can do like what I call my own resume, I call like extracurriculars, which is like a volunteer experience and then honors and awards. I kind of bucket those two things together. In my mind, okay, this is education, this isn't core work experience. It's kind of like all the other things I do outside of those two things. The important thing is to make sure that it makes sense. So for example, I wouldn't put like education and then honors and awards if those only came from work. If maybe you got like, made Dean's List or something, okay, maybe that would make sense to have honors and awards grouped with your education. But if those honors and awards, like let's say you won, let's say employee of the month at a part-time job, doesn't really fit in the education section. Likewise, maybe you're doing volunteer work, but then you also have like a professional certification, like your CPA. That probably fits a little bit better in the work experience section. So just make sure that however you do decide to group things, it does make sense and there's consistency there. But again, the order is not really as important as you might think it is. Angie really hit the nail on the head here. You'll see 1,000 different resume templates out there that have everything kind of in all kinds of different order. I've even seen some things that I thought was interesting. And maybe some of the other folks on the call can kind of weigh in how you would feel about this. I've seen where they actually had two different, it was someone who accounting was a second career for them. And so they actually had two different sections for experience. They had accounting experience and then they had other experience. And it was interesting because they had, in the accounting experience, was an internship they had recently done that they had done. So this was like, I think in the summertime, and they had done a spring internship. So like January through March. And then summertime, they resumed other employment, but they had that down below in their other experience. So they really wanted to call out that specific accounting internship that they had done. Okay, nothing wrong with that. If it makes sense and that kind of helps present you in the best light, I think it's okay to break that up, just as long as it's consistent throughout. Anyone else have anything to add on that? Laura, if you have anything to add on that one, if not, we can go to the next question. We're at 5 minutes. I just realized that. But anything to add on that real quick, Laura, then we'll go to the
Yeah,
slide.
I was just say there's different ways you can group it. Like, for instance, you can have a section that's like professional and community involvement if it's volunteer and you already have several years of experience, that you're not fresh out of college. You can have the experience section, and then professional and community involvement can be like your TXCPA experience and then the Central Texas Food Bank. Like, one is professional, one's not, but it shows like you're philanthropic or whatever. The awards that Brian was saying earlier, if you have some that are like professional and not professional, just group them into one section and say achievements. That's how I have mine. I don't necessarily, if it's one thing, I don't think you should make a separate category for it. Find the heading that would actually make it fit into something else, if that makes sense.
Yep. So great question mark on the objective statement. I would say they do. Like, it's one of those things where it won't necessarily hurt you if it's not there, but it will help you. True story. I actually had a classmate who had applied for an internship at a public accounting firm. It applied for a tax internship. Somehow, somewhere along the way, paperwork got crossed, and they actually sat in on an interview for an audit internship. And so right away, like, okay, what's going on here? Luckily, they had on their objective for the resume of seeking a tax internship. And so the partner who was doing the interviewing is like, okay, clearly the recruiter messed something up here. Obviously, that's a rare thing, but it does happen. And it really helps to say beyond, and I feel this is a difficult thing, like as a student, you want to say, I'll take anything. I just want to get my foot in the door. I'll take any tax internship. I don't care. But really, if you have something specific in mind, show it for two reasons. One, because obviously you don't want to think you're not interested in. So Laura, you mentioned earlier that, sales and use tax is SALT. You don't do that, period. Maybe sales and use tax is something you really do want to do. Don't just say, I want a tax internship, because they might put you in like federal tax or something and you wouldn't enjoy that. You're like, I really want to do sales and use tax. Put down your objective. Looking for a sales and use tax internship. So A, hopefully it gets you what you want. And B, it kind of signals to the employer that, okay, hey, I've really thought out my career. I want to do this. And the interview is going to give you a opportunity to explain how and why you want that particular objective. The other thing I'll say, and my opinion, I think that you'll hear back and forth on this, but the summary of qualifications, I'm of the opinion that you should never have that section, because I should see it in your actual resume. Like, no one in the world is going to put on the resume, I'm bad at time management. I'm not a good listener. I work well. I don't work well in a team. Everyone's always going to put kind of those buzzwords at the top, but without the substance to back it up, they're just buzzwords. You should be able to say, okay, in my role, manage a team of 6 people and help to increase return turnaround time by 30 minutes or whatever the case may be. You should be able to show it in your bullet points in the body of your resume. You shouldn't have to just call out those buzzwords separately. So don't know if Angie or Laura, if you have any other opinions on that one.
I like a quick summary at the top, but I agree. It should be backed up in the content of the resume for sure.
Yeah, I do agree with that. So I think things maybe like software, things that you would list, like software usage, that if you're trying to pass the filter or whatever, software that you use like Excel, that's if you're in tax, the tax software, if you're in audit, whatever that is. But obviously if you're entry level, you won't have those. Again, that's where your learning skills come to play, as far as you don't have this, but you're gonna get it by working for this company.
Cool, and we're right about at time. Does anyone else have kind of any last minute questions we can knock out really quick? Feel free to just go ahead and just come off mute. Don't have to waste the time to type it out. Anything at all? Okay, well, let me go ahead and I